As the book of Leviticus detailed many laws that God had given the Israelites, the book of Numbers, although also including components of the law, focuses on this holy people that God has been preparing on helping them be mobilized. And so now we're going to see them start moving. Now, note that they are surely by now a great nation as God had promised. Remember Genesis chapter 12 and these three promises, these three main promises that God had made to Abraham? Well, now by the time that they leave Mount Sinai, after coming out of Egypt, and they've got their law, they are now a holy nation. They have been made into this great nation as God had promised them. Now, having been given the law and built the tabernacle and established the priesthood and all the various components of what God had done for Israel at Mount Sinai, God was getting ready to start moving them toward the promised land. So we pick up in the book of Numbers and we see that, as the name of the book would indicate, there's some numbering that goes on. There's numbering and organizing of the people. In the second year after Israel's departure from Egypt, Moses and Aaron were to take a census of every male 20 years old and above in Israel who could serve in Israel's army. Numbers chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 is how the book begins. The Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting in the wilderness of Sinai on the first day of the second month of the second year after Israel's departure from the land of Egypt. Take a census of the entire Israelite community by their clans and their ancestral families, counting the names of every male one by one. You and Aaron are to register those who are 20 years old or more by their military divisions, everyone who can serve in Israel's army. A man from each tribe is to be with you, each one the head of his ancestral family. So as we see him then doing this, we see that the total from each tribe, the total number was 603,550. Now, the Levites were exempt from this, as they were going to be responsible for the tabernacle and its furnishings, as he goes on later here in chapter 1 and verses 47 through 51. But the Levites were not registered with them by their ancestral tribe, for the Lord had told Moses, "Do not register or take a census of the tribe of Levi with the other Israelites. Appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, all its furnishings, and everything in it. They are to transport the tabernacle and all its articles, take care of it, and camp around it. Whenever the tabernacle is to move, the Levites are to take it down, and whenever it is to stop at a campsite, the Levites are to set it up. Any unauthorized person who comes near it is to be put to death." So the Levites had a very particular responsibility, so they were separate from the other tribes of Israel. You can also read in chapter 3, verses 5 through 13. The Israelites then were to camp by their own divisions, verses 52 through 54. The Israelites are to camp by their military divisions, each man with his encampment and under his banner. The Levites are to camp around the tabernacle of the testimony and watch over it, so that no wrath will fall on the Israelite community. The Israelites did everything just as the Lord had commanded Moses. There's that phrase again that we have seen several times. We see as they camped around the tabernacle, we see that Judah's encampment, which included the tribes of Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, that Judah's encampment was on the east side of the tabernacle. Reuben's encampment, which included the tribes of Reuben, Simeon, and Gad, Reuben's encampment was on the south side of the tabernacle. Ephraim's encampment, which include Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin, was on the west side of the tabernacle. And then Dan's encampment, which included the tribes of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, was on the north side of the tabernacle. So there's your layout of how these tribes were to camp around the tabernacle. God then divided the responsibilities given to the Levites into 4 categories. We see the Gershonites. Remember, Levi had those 3 sons. And so the Gershonites, those who came from his line, camped on the west side of the tabernacle. And they were responsible for certain things concerning the tabernacle. And you can read about that in Numbers chapter 3 and verses 23 through 26. It tells us how the Gershonites' duties at the tent of meeting involved the tabernacle, the tent, its covering, the screen for the entrance to the tent of meeting, the hangings of the courtyard, the screen for the entrance to the courtyard that surrounds the tabernacle and the altar and the tent ropes, all the work relating to these. And so we see the curtains and the hangings of the tabernacle and such things in the courtyard being in their duties. You can also go down to chapter 4 and read verses 21 through 28. The Kohathites camped on the south side of the tabernacle, Numbers 3, verses 29 through 32. And they had certain responsibilities as well. It says their duties involved the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the sanctuary utensils that were used with these, and the screen, and all the work relating to them. And then, of course, the chief of the Levite leaders was Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest. He had oversight of those responsible for the duties of the sanctuary. Remember that Aaron and his sons are also from this clan of Kohath. But the Kohathites have the responsibilities then for the furnishings of the tabernacle. Okay, so they're on the south side. Now we get to the Merarites, who camped on the north side of the tabernacle, and they had certain responsibilities as well, verses 36 and 37. The assigned duties of Merari's descendants involved the tabernacle's supports, crossbars, pillars, bases, and all its equipment, and all the work related to these, in addition to the posts of the surrounding courtyard with their bases, tent pegs, and ropes. And so these had responsibility for the supports, bases, pillars, crossbars, equipment, pegs, and ropes of the tabernacle. You can also see chapter 4, verses 29 through 33. And so here's these 3 clans, and they're camping in their assigned spots, and they have certain duties as it relates to the tabernacle and the transportation of the tabernacle and so forth. Well, then we have Moses and Aaron's sons, that though they are from Kohath, we also, though, see that they are to camp on the east side in front of the tabernacle. They are particularly, Aaron and his sons are serve as the line of the priests. So they're the ones who would offer the sacrifices prescribed by the Lord as priests. Numbers 3, verse 38. Moses, Aaron, and his sons who performed the duties of the sanctuary as a service on behalf of the Israelites camped in front of the tabernacle on the east, in front of the tent of meeting toward the sunrise. Any unauthorized person who came near it was to be put to death. So this was a duty particularly given then to Aaron and his sons. So when the Israelites traveled, okay, now that we've got them laid out and how they're to camp and how they're to transport the tabernacle and so forth, we see that God gave them a particular order to follow then. When they traveled, the encampment of Judah moved first, followed by the Gershonites and the Merarites who were carrying the tabernacle, followed by the encampment of Reuben, followed by the Kohathites who were carrying the tabernacle furniture, followed by the encampment of Ephraim, and then the encampment of Dan. The Israelites were to move whenever the cloud that covered the tabernacle whenever that lifted, and they were to camp whenever the cloud stopped. Let's read in Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 through 23. It says, "On the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony, and it appeared like fire above the tabernacle from evening until morning. It remained that way continuously. The cloud would cover it, appearing like fire at night. Whenever the cloud was lifted up above the tent, the Israelites would set out. At the place where the cloud stopped, there the Israelites camped. At the Lord's command, the Israelites set out, and at the Lord's command, they camped. As long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle, they camped." Even when the cloud stayed over the tabernacle many days, the Israelites carried out the Lord's requirement and did not set out. Sometimes the cloud remained over the tabernacle for only a few days. They would camp at the Lord's command and set out at the Lord's command. Sometimes the cloud remained only from evening until morning. When the cloud lifted in the morning, they set out. Or if it remained a day and a night, they moved out when the cloud lifted. Whether it was 2 days, a month, or longer, the Israelites camped and did not set out as long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle. But when it was lifted, they set out. They camped at the Lord's command, and they set out at the Lord's command. They carried out the Lord's requirement according to his command through Moses. We also can read then how there were 2 silver trumpets that were also made that would summon and would direct Israel and would tell them to gather together, and they were about to move out and different things of that nature. So God has now numbered and organized the people, or at least through God's directions, and now they are ready. And so we see the journey. But yet, as we watch the journey, what we notice perhaps most about the journey is how often they are complaining during the journey. So after being at Sinai for around a year, and God having prepared them to be his holy people, the people then set out to continue the journey to the promised land. Numbers chapter 10, verses 11 through 13. It says, "During the 2nd year, in the 2nd month, on the 20th day of the month, the cloud was lifted up above the tabernacle of the testimony. The Israelites traveled on from the wilderness of Sinai, moving from one place to the next, until the cloud stopped in the wilderness of Paran. They set out for the first time according to the Lord's command through Moses." So now the Israelites are moving. However, as they traveled, they regularly complained. At Taberah, they complained about hardships, and God sent fire among the outskirts of the camp. Look at Numbers 11, verses 1 through 3. "Now the people began complaining openly before the Lord about hardship. When the Lord heard, his anger burned, and fire from the Lord blazed among them and consumed the outskirts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So that place was named Taberah, because the Lord's fire had blazed among them." Well, then we see that at Kibroth Hattaavah, they complained about the manna that God provided for them. Look in verses 4 through 6. "The riffraff among them had a strong craving for other food. The Israelites wept again and said, 'Who will feed us meat? We remember the free fish we ate in Egypt, along with the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now our appetite is gone. There's nothing to look at but this manna.' And we see that God sent them quail, verses 18 through 20. Verses 31 and 32, he also sent a severe plague, verses 33 through 34. Then at Hazeroth, even Aaron and Miriam, remember Moses' brother and sister, complained about God only speaking through Moses. Chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses because of the Cushite woman he married, for he had married a Cushite woman. They said, "Does the Lord speak only through Moses? Does he not also speak through us?" And the Lord heard it. Moses was a very humble man, more than anyone on the face of the earth. And what we see is then that God reaffirmed his communication through Moses in verses 5 through 8, and then he punished Miriam, verses 9 through 15. So throughout this journey, as you have hopefully read through and seen these different stops along the way, as we're just getting these snapshots, but yet we're seeing all this complaining. Remember, they're supposed to be now leading into the land of Canaan. But now we see that Israel refuses to enter Canaan. In Kadesh Barnea, according to Numbers 32 and verse 8, the Israelites requested for scouts to be sent into the land of Canaan that God had promised to give them. Numbers 1, verses 22 and 23 points us to the fact that this was something that they had requested. And God gave instructions then for one to be sent from each of the tribes. Numbers 13, verses 1 and 2. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Send men to scout out the land of Canaan I am giving to the Israelites. Send one man who is a leader among them from each of their ancestral tribes." Okay, so one from each of these tribes going out to the land. They were to scout out the land that God had promised to give them, and then they're going to come back and give a report. Verses 13 through, or excuse me, in verses 17 through 20 of chapter 13. When Moses sent them to scout out the land of Canaan, he told them, "Go up this way to the Negev, then go into the hill country, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. Is the land they live in good or bad? Are the cities they live in encampments or fortifications? Is the land fertile or unproductive? Are there trees in it or not? Be courageous. Bring back some fruit from the land." It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So they're wanting to know about this land that God's bringing them into. What's this look like? What are the people? How strong are they? What are the cities like? What's the fruit like? All of these different pieces. And so their 40-day journey of scouting the land is recorded then in chapter 13, verses 21 through 25. And we see how they went and scouted the land through all these various places, how the descendants of Anak were living there. Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came to the Eshcol Valley. They cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, which was carried on a pole by 2 men. They also took some pomegranates and figs. That place was called Eshcol Valley because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from scouting out the land. All right, so the land is producing very sufficient fruit, very exceptional fruit. And when the Israelites returned, then they reported to the Israelites. And when these scouts returned, look at verses 26 through 29. The men went back to Moses, Aaron, and the entire Israelite community in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back a report for them and the whole community, and they showed them the fruit of the land. They reported to Moses, "We went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey, and here is some of its fruit. However, the people living in the land are strong, and the cities are large and fortified. We also saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites are living in the land of Negev. The Hethites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea and along the Jordan." So here's this report. Yes, the land is good, but the people are strong. The cities are large. The cities are very well fortified. Well, Caleb and Joshua, who were among these spies, these scouts, they urged the people to go and conquer the land in verse 30. Then Caleb quieted the people in the presence of Moses and said, "Let's go up now and take possession of the land, because we can certainly conquer it." And so he's got faith in God. God can lead them up, and God can give them this land. Let's go and do this. God is with us. But the other 10 who were sent responded with fear and with a negative report, as we see in verses 31 through 33. But the men who had gone up with him responded, "We can't attack the people because they are stronger than we are." So they gave a negative report to the Israelites about the land they had scouted. "The land we passed through to explore is one that devours its inhabitants. And all the people we saw in it are men of great size. We even saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak, come from the Nephilim. To ourselves we seem like grasshoppers, and we must have seemed the same to them." And so they respond with fear. We can't go do it. The people are too big. The people are too strong, and so forth. In response, the whole community of the Israelites complained about even being led out of Egypt to die in the wilderness, and they just wanted another leader to be appointed to take them back. Numbers chapter 14, verses 1 through 4. Then the whole Israelite community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites complained about Moses and Aaron, and the whole community told them, "If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in the wilderness." This is why why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? Our wives and children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? So they said to one another, "Let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt." God had brought them out. God had done all of these things, but now let's go back. But meanwhile, Joshua and Caleb encouraged them to trust God rather than to rebel. Look in verses 6 through 10. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who scouted out the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite community, "The land we passed through and explored is an extremely good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into this land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and give it to us. Only don't rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of the land, for we will devour them. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them." While the whole community threatened to stone them, the glory of the Lord appeared to all the Israelites at the tent of meeting. Joshua and Caleb have faith in God. We can do this. God will deliver us. Well, God was greatly displeased with the Israelites for not trusting in him. Verses 11 and 12, the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people despise me? How long will they not trust in me? Despite all the signs I have performed among them, I will strike them with a plague and destroy them, that I will make you into a greater and mightier nation than they are." And God then would not allow the faithless rebels to enter the promised land. Let's read in verses 20 through 35. The Lord responded, "I have pardoned them as you requested. Yet as I live, and as the whole earth is filled with the Lord's glory, none of the men who have seen my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tested me these 10 times and did not obey me, will ever see the land I swore to give their ancestors. None of those who have despised me will see it. But since my servant Caleb has a different spirit and has remained loyal to me, I will bring him into the land where he has gone, and his descendants will inherit it. Since the Amalekites and the Canaanites are living in the lowlands, turn back tomorrow and head for the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "How long must I endure this evil community that keeps complaining about me? I have heard the Israelites' complaints that they make against me. Tell them, as I live, this is the Lord's declaration, I will do to you exactly as I have heard you say. Your corpses will fall in the wilderness. All of you who were registered in the census, the entire number of you 20 years old or more, because you have complained about me. I swear that none of you will enter the land I promised to settle you in, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. I will bring your children, whom you said would become plunder, into the land you rejected, and they will enjoy it. But as for you, your corpses will fall in this wilderness. Your children will be shepherds in the wilderness for 40 years and bear the penalty for your acts of unfaithfulness until all your corpses lie scattered in the wilderness. You will bear the consequences of your iniquities 40 years based on the number of the 40 days that you scouted the land, a year for each day. You will know my displeasure. I, the Lord, have spoken. I swear that I will do this to the entire evil community that has conspired against me. They will come to an end in the wilderness, and there they will die." So, all of these will die in the wilderness except for the children and Joshua and Caleb. We also see that God killed the 10 spies in verses 36 through 38. So the men Moses sent to scout out the land and who returned and incited the entire community to complain about him by spreading a negative report about the land, those men who spread the negative report about the land were struck down by the Lord. Only Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, remained alive of those men who went to scout out the land. And then we see that they make efforts anyways to go and try to take some of the land, but they went without God's help, and they failed, and they were routed another way. Verses 39 through 45. We also want to note then that there were more complaints after this. There were complaints about leadership. One notable rebellion of the people after this involved a Kohathite man named Korah, and those with him complaining about the leadership, complaining against the leadership of Moses and Aaron, who were also Kohathites, saying they had exalted themselves. Numbers chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. Now Korah, son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, son of Dathan, and Abiram, son of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took 250 prominent Israelite men who were leaders of the community and representatives in the assembly, and they rebelled against Moses. They came together against Moses and Aaron and told them, "You have gone too far. Everyone in the entire community is holy, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" In verses 13 and 14, "Is it not enough that you brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness? Do you also have to appoint yourself as ruler over us? Furthermore, you didn't bring us to a land flowing with milk and honey, or give us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you gouge out the eyes of these men? We will not come." And so you can see the rebellion of these men. Moses indicated to them that the Lord would reveal who was set apart and who could come near him as priests. In Numbers 16, verses 4 through 7, when Moses heard this, he fell face down. Then he said to Korah and all his followers, "Tomorrow morning the Lord will reveal who belongs to him, who is set apart, and the one he will let come near him. He will let the one he chooses come near him. Korah, you and all your followers are to do this. Take fire pans and tomorrow place fire in them and put incense on them before the Lord. Then the man the Lord chooses will be the one who is set apart. It is you Levites who have gone too far." And Moses indicated that these rebels did not appreciate how God had chosen to use them. They wanted what Moses and Aaron had, and how God was using them, and were downplaying how God had already chosen to use the Kohathites. Verses 8 through 11, Moses also told Korah, "Now listen, Levites, isn't it enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the Israelite community to bring you near to himself, to perform the work at the Lord's tabernacle, and to stand before the community to minister to them? He has brought you near, and all your fellow Levites who are with you, but you are pursuing the priesthood as well. Therefore it is you and all your followers who have conspired against the Lord. As for Aaron, who is he that you should complain about him?" So if the men who rebelled, if they would meet death in an unprecedented way by being swallowed by the ground, and the people would know Moses had been sent by God. Verses 28 through 30. This is how Moses says, "This is how you will know that the Lord sent me to do all these things, and that it is not of my own will. If these men die naturally, as all people would, and suffer the fate of all, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something unprecedented, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them along with all that belongs to them, so that they go down alive into Sheol, then you will know that these men have despised the Lord." Well, we see that the thing happened just as Moses said, and the rebels were swallowed alive. Verses 31 through 35. Just as he finished speaking all these words, the ground beneath them split open. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them and their households, all Korah's people and all their possessions. They went down alive into Sheol with all that belonged to them. The earth closed over them, and they vanished from the assembly. At their cries, all the people of Israel who were around them fled, because they thought, "The earth may swallow us too." Fire also came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were presenting the incense. So God chose in the way Moses had talked about. Plus, a plague was sent in the camp, and it was stopped after it killed 14,700 people. You can see that in verses 46 through 50. And this was in addition to those who died because of the Korah incident. God also made it clear that he had chosen Aaron by causing his staff to bud. And you can see that in Numbers chapter 17 in verse 5. That's how God was going to indicate it, that the staff of the man he chose would sprout. And then in verses 8 through 10, that here is Aaron's staff, representing the house of Levi, had sprouted, formed buds, blossomed, and produced almonds. Moses then brought out all the staffs from the Lord's presence to all the Israelites. They saw them, and each man took his own staff. The Lord told Moses, "Put Aaron's staff back in front of the testimony to be kept as a sign for the rebels, so that you may put an end to their complaints before me, or else they will die." So Moses did as the Lord commanded him, in verse 11. So, I've seen all these complaints, and particularly how God answers these complaints about leadership in that text. So we see that God had been preparing his special people to take possession of the Canaan land and live according to his commands. However, this great nation would now face the consequences of their rebellion against God. Now, due to their faithlessness, they would die in the wilderness without going into the promised land, except the children, Joshua, and Caleb.